Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and a very good morning to those of you who are joining from the US or other parts of the world. I'm Monali Zeya Hazra, Regional Energy Manager and Clean Energy Specialist at USAID India, and your host for today's session. I'm delighted to welcome you to the 2021 edition of the Energy and the Resource Institute's annual flagship event, the World Sustainable Development Summit, being held virtually under the broad theme, Redefining Our Common Future, Safe and Secure Environment for All, being held from 10th to 12th February 2021. This edition of WSDS marks 20 years of the platform, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to this thematic discussion, Women on the Rise, Prioritizing Gender Equity as a Business Imperative. This thematic discussion is being co-organized by TERI along with the South Asia Women in Energy, or SAWIE as it is commonly called. SAWIE is a joint initiative of USAID and US ISPF, which stands for US-India Strategic Partnership Forum. We know that over a period of time, a growing body of evidence has demonstrated a correlation between gender diversity at the executive level and the company performance. A recent study analyzed more than 1,000 companies in 12 countries and concluded that gender diverse companies are more likely to outperform the national industry average in terms of profitability. Despite these evidences that demonstrate women's value in the workforce, women continue to encounter barriers to participate in the world economy, particularly in industries traditionally dominated by men. USAID is committed to creating a space for dialogue to enable gender equality and women's empowerment, which are central to effective and sustainable development outcomes. Many of the USAID's program and collaboration across the world are focused on prioritizing gender equity as a business imperative. To name a few, USAID's Engineering Utilities program supports energy utilities to increase gender equality in the workplace. There's another program called Gender Equity Executive Leadership Program, which trains leaders in energy companies across the world to adopt gender equitable practices throughout the human resources lifecycle. SAWIE is another such initiative which focuses on promoting women leadership. Within a short span of time since it was established, SAWIE has become a leading advocate for gender equality and women's empowerment. Partnering with like-minded institutes such as TERI for WSDS 2021 provided us a great opportunity to highlight this very important theme. As a run-up to WSDS, we had an excellent discussion in a pre-event which was organized in December 2020. And now we are looking forward to taking this discussion to the next level and hearing our eminent speakers today. The first panel, Diversity and Inclusion, Gender Equity as a Business Imperative, will discuss the broader process and procedures to incentivize businesses to bridge the gender gap and empower women as a part of their business model. It will further deliberate the importance of creating evidences and accounting tools. We have for you an excellent moderator, Ms. Gauri Jauhar, to discuss this very important theme with a panel of really good speakers. Gauri is the Executive Director in the IHS Markit's Energy Consulting team, covering the Asia and Middle East market. Gauri's primary focus is conceptualizing and leading the delivery of consulting projects in Indian energy sector related to energy policy development, energy transition, gas renewable integration, and so on. So without further ado, let me pass it on to Gauri to take on our first panel discussion for today. So over to you, Gauri.
Thank you, Monali, for the kind introduction and great context setting by you in terms of the great work that USAID is doing in this field. Thanks also to TERI, to US ISPF, USAID, and SAWIE for really putting together such an important topic right at the start of 2021. When we are looking at the world is looking to recover, and the world is looking to recover with the right business imperatives, and nothing better than putting gender equity right in the middle of those business imperatives. And we have four incredible women who I think have navigated the business world. They have achieved, they have led, and they've led with inclusion, maybe also in a world of the proverbial boys club. if we just consider the numbers, I think just as a context setting, diversity, gender equity is good for business. There is a study by McKinsey which talks about if women are brought into the workforce in their full potential, it could add an additional $28 trillion to the global economy by 2050. That's a tall order. And I think we have some fabulous business leaders here who have really walked that talk. And I think as there's a rise in this collective awareness about gender equity, I think both men and women alike are reaching that tipping point when they recognize that the numbers which are skewed right now have to change. So without any further ado, I would like to invite Katie into the panel first. Katie McGinty is the Vice President and Chief Sustainability, Government and Regulatory Affairs Officer from Johnson Controls. She's been an innovator in clean energy and environmental protection and champions technology development, sustainability, and creative policies to solve tough environmental problems. She's also served as the chair of the White House Council on Environmental Quality, as a deputy assistant to the president in the 90s, a Pennsylvania Secretary of Environmental Protection, and the chair of the Pennsylvania Energy Development Authority. So, Katie, I would like to invite you to share your opening remarks and some highlights about the work you've done, focusing on navigating this world from a gender equity perspective, but also leading to business impact. Over to you, Katie. You're on mute, Katie.
There we go. At the very start, someone has to start, namely me. But let me just say thank you, Gauri, and to everyone who is participating. I just want to start with a note of deep gratitude and humility here. This is a beautiful panel of organizations and individuals who are doing so much to lift people up. And I feel privileged to be part of this discussion. So with that, I would just say a couple of things to build on the incredible foundation you and Monali have laid for us here. Three things come to mind for me as we kick off our discussion. First, as you both have driven home, the data, the stats are totally in. This is a point now beyond debate around the perimeters. The heart of the matter is that when we have women and more diverse universe on the boards and in leadership of organizations, it is clear that those organizations outperform. A couple of the key indicators: there is greater perception of where market trends are heading when you have diversity of perspective around the table. With that greater ability to anticipate trends, hands down, the agility of an organization is significantly increased, and its ability to drive to the head of those market trends. Now, here's what I think is really interesting, sticking with the data, sticking with the numbers. Tough times prove a trend. And COVID certainly has brought tough times. Mm-hmm. In this tough time, follow the money. Where has the money gone? Mm-hmm. Has this statistical proof about gender diversity being critical held up to that test? And I think these numbers are absolutely compelling. Investors have flocked towards investment opportunities emphasizing environmental protection and diversity. So ESG funds, for example, now assets under management north of $1.3 trillion. Mm-hmm. ESG index funds significantly outperforming the S&P 500. And on this one, I can also give just firsthand evidence. Issuance of bonds in the green bond market, hugely oversubscribed. Johnson Controls was one of the first industrials to go into the green bond market in the U.S. capital markets. We were 9 times oversubscribed for our green bond. So to me, the statistics are in, investors are flocking to those companies that prioritize gender diversity and environmental protection. Two other things I would just share to kick us off again. The times are changing, thankfully. In Asia, and I want to salute governments in Asia, governments in Europe, just saying the debate's over and we insist that you have diversity on those boards. Now, buckle your seatbelt, believe it or not, even in the United States under our previous administration, the first step towards mandatory disclosures of diversity in a human capital disclosures, that trend of government action, I think, is being bolstered by business action. When you have the BlackRocks, the State Streets insisting on disclosure and action, this is great stuff. Those two trends coming together, I think, give us the ability to stick and stay with growing the presence of women and diversity more broadly in our organizations. And last thing I'll just share to kick us off again is, ladies and gentlemen, to continue this trend, this can't be like that, 10 pounds you're going to lose and you whisper it into your pillow at night and then the next day you have the piece of cake. This has to be about intentionality, transparency, and data-driven. You have to make a goal. Johnson Controls has announced we're going to double women and minorities in leadership in 5 years. You have to be transparent. You got to put it out there publicly, not whisper it in your pillow, and then have key metrics so that you're holding yourself and others can hold you to account every single year. We put all that together, and I think this moment in time becomes not just a flash in the pan, but a defining moment where finally we begin to take the barriers down. So I'm excited and I'm thrilled. I think we really are at a pivot point.
Yes. Thank you so much, Katie. I think you made some very strong points about intentionality, transparency, and data, because finally, the numbers have to change. And I really liked your point about following the money, as you talked about ESG. And, while ESG seems to be this sort of, in some senses, a collection of disparate things, but the coming together of ESG and money going into those funds, and congratulations on Johnson Controls being one of those first companies for the green bond, is very telling, and it is a pivot point. I'd like to now pivot to Dr. Laurel Harmon, who's the Vice President, Government Affairs, LanzaTech, and invite her for her opening remarks. Dr. Harmon joined LanzaTech from Stritus, and, you said follow the money. I think we're going to follow the technology here with Dr. Harmon. She has led work in advanced technologies, including energy and renewables. After receiving her PhD in physical chemistry from the University of Michigan, she joined ERIM, a nonprofit research organization to conduct applied R&D, has been a technical co-founder of Nonlinear Dynamics, a company specialized in applied pattern recognition, and now she has pivoted her career more towards policy direction and leadership on international legislative and regulatory matters, and develops the collaborative research and demonstration projects. I'd also like to acknowledge Harmon, Dr. Harmon, your colleague, Preeti Jain, who shared some great background about you to me, about some of the work that you've just done with British Airways. And I think on our panel, we have L'Oreal. You have a tie-up with L'Oreal as well. So welcome to the panel, and over to you for your opening remarks.
Well, thank you so much for that kind introduction, and it's a real pleasure to be here. I am most of all looking forward to the dialogue and hearing the perspectives that will be shared here. Wonderful opening remarks by Katie, really laying out the foundation from the business, the economic point of view. I think perhaps what I bring to this discussion is the view of impact of diversity on innovation. We are a small company. We now have achieved 200 people with a presence. Our headquarters is in the US. We do have a presence in India. We expect to grow to about 20 people in India this year. But we are a technology company. We were only founded in 2005 with an absolutely brand new idea to recycle carbon from emissions and other waste sources into sustainable fuels and carbon smart materials and chemicals. So we had an idea in 2005, and we could only succeed through innovation. And we have done that to the point that our first commercial plant is operating in China. And the second plant is being built by Indian Oil to recycle refinery emissions into ethanol for both fuels and chemicals. So the key here, I think one of the very strong features that's allowed us to make this progress is that the company has been diverse in many respects from the beginning. We brought on a CEO who is a woman in 2010, Jennifer Holmgren, who was a leader in both sustainable fuels and also in the development, sustainable chemicals, but the development of sustainable aviation fuel. We, at this point, our management team is just about 50% female. We have 2 female directors. But if you look throughout the company, we have leadership and a strong workforce that is diverse across all dimensions. And we were really excited this year, for example, that our synthetic biology team is now half women.
Wow.
And
congratulations on that.
Thank you. Yes, we celebrated in an all-hands meeting. But the tie-in is to economics. And the Boston Consulting Group did a study in 2016 looking at the impact of diversity in leadership and innovation. And what they found is that those companies that had diverse leadership teams had revenues from innovation that had taken place in just the last 3 years that were 50% higher than companies that did not have diverse representation. And that overall they had EBIT margins that were 9% higher. And as we think about recovering from the pandemic, it is innovation that we are going to have to count on to reframe our world, to reshape our world. And so diversity is going to be a key to that as well. And I would also add, when we reference the pandemic, this has been a tragic time and an opportunity because so many women have left the workforce during the pandemic. And as they re-enter, as we bring them back in, this is an opportunity to reshape how the workforce looks.
Great. Thank you so much, Laurel. I think those are very useful comments to understand how innovation and economics can come together in delivering sustainability, as exemplified by your company. I mean, I think your company is probably one of the most diverse companies in the energy business, and I think a study should be done on that. Moving on now to Ms. Christine Linz. She's the Executive Director for the Global Women's Network on the Energy Transition, and I think this really, her role really brings in the whole aspect of community. She has 24 years of professional experience in the fields of renewable energy and energy efficiency, with a strong network in the sustainable energy area, both from the private and public sector. She's highly committed to working on sustainable energy at the international level and has generated solutions by thinking out of the box. So really over to you, Christine, for your opening remarks and what you are seeing in the community of renewable energy, especially across the world as we contend with the issue of energy transition. Did we lose Christine? Okay. I think we've lost Christine here. Christine, if you're there, could you unmute yourself? I don't. Yeah, I see you, Christine. Could you please unmute yourself? Christine, could you unmute yourself?
Gauri, you may
I think while we resolve Christine's network issue, I think we do not have Miss Alexandra Palt right now. So I'll
Yes, you do.
Alexander,
Yeah.
she's also
You do.
online now.
glad
Yeah.
you've joined. Glad you've been able to join.
I'm sorry.
Welcome, Alexandra.
we did made. Yeah, thank you very much. I'm sorry we made a mistake in the time retranscription. So
No worries.
I'm supposed to connect in 4 minutes, but
Okay.
I'm just getting in my office and I'll connect with video in a few moments.
Okay, we'll roll. I'll start with your introduction. So Ms. Alexandra Palt is the Chief Corporate Sustainability Officer for L'Oreal and the Executive Vice President of the Foundation L'Oreal. As the Executive Vice President, Chief Corporate Sustainability Officer of L'Oreal, her mission is really to ensure that to collectively go beyond the transformation of the business model in a more inclusive and sustainable world. L'Oreal has started its first sustainability program with targets which were initially set to 2020 and are now accelerating a new program of L'Oreal for the future with a new generation of bold sustainability targets for 2030. And as I noted earlier, I think it was fascinating to see, I think it was in October 2020 that Laurel, your team and L'Oreal actually struck a deal on packaging with zero carbon emissions, which, I mean, when I saw that, I just sat back and thought, wow, that's a whole new way of, bringing the energy and the fashion worlds together, for instance. Alexandra, over to you for your introductory remarks.
Thank you very much. So can you hear me and see me or not?
I can hear you.
Okay, I hope you will also see me in a second.
Okay.
So yeah, also see me. Okay, great.
I can hear you very clearly. So that's great.
That's great. So yes, I would like to say, well, you know that L'Oreal is a very, very gender diverse company. Obviously, part of it is linked to our profession, but I think, for a long time, even in our profession, the profession of beauty, men and the system thought that men knew better what women needed. And so it's a movement for the last 20 years that changed leadership very strongly at L'Oreal. So we have a board that is more than half women. We have an executive committee where we are 35% of women. We have 60% of our brands that are led by women. And, basically in leadership roles, we have equality. I think what is now interesting is that we have, that L'Oreal is a very good performing company. I will not repeat all the things on innovation, but I do also think that nowadays, we had this discussion 20 years ago, and we said already the same things 20 years ago. I think we can acknowledge that things moved forward. It is very clearly, but especially what we have to consider is that now there is a generation coming up that is, where everybody, all women basically, are feminist, are committed, are engaged, and do not accept anymore inequality. And that changes very much the relationship that these women have with brands, and that in general the young generation has with brands. And we can see that very clearly. So also from our consumer side, so we do not have just the employee side, but we have also from our consumer side a whole new world out there where Me Too, the Women's March, the global women's movement is a movement that is shared and that is expected to be supported by brands like our brands, especially brands, of course, that address themselves to women. So we are in a whole new world. And I think for a company like ours, it's of course the issue of our employees, but it's also our issue of relationship with all our stakeholders that is impacted.
Right. Great. Thanks, Alexandra. I think you really emphasize that it's I think everybody's in it now. and nobody is accepting inequality, which is also very important. I think for a long time, women were accepting inequality. And I think that raising of the awareness and consciousness is so important. And again, great to know about the diversity which is in your company in terms of the board and your plans for the future. I'd like to see if Christine can join us now. I think we've reworked her technical issues. Christine, over to you for your opening remarks, and then we'll do a moderated discussion.
Thank you, Gauri. Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you.
Excellent. Fantastic. Sorry for the hiccup. Welcome again. Good afternoon, ladies, and hopefully also gentlemen listening to us, because I think the issue of empowering women is not only a women's issue, it's also an issue that concerns the men that are not at the panel at the moment, which is not a problem, but it's really an issue of both men and women to get the gender equation right. We have heard lots of stories and also numbers that this makes perfect economic sense. It's not only a human right that women have equal opportunities in the labor market, but it is also proven. And Gauri has cited some studies at the beginning that this increases GDP. It makes companies more robust to shock, and also makes them perform better in the environmental and sustainability field. As you have mentioned in the introduction, I rely on more than 25 years of work experience in the sustainable energy field. And a couple of years ago, I came together with a couple of other women, and we co-founded GWNet, the Global Women's Network for the Energy Transition, because we just realized that what women do lack often are role models in this field, and sometimes it's a bit discouraging that there are not enough women out there in this field. So we got together, created a non-profit membership-based association, which is headquartered in Austria. We launched it at the Vienna Energy Forum organized by UNIDO back in 2017. And since then, we have over 1,500 members from 100 plus countries. We have lots of institutional partnerships with the World Bank, IRENA. We're currently discussing with the Africa EU Energy Commission. So different body, UNIDO, of course, different UN bodies. And it's about bringing women together. And when you look at the statistics now in the field of renewable energy, we globally have at the moment 11.5 million people employed in this field. And there are roughly 32% women, which of course are higher numbers than in conventional energy fields, such as oil and gas, where the percentage is only at 22%. But when you look at the more STEM jobs, the numbers decrease, number of women decreases. And when we hear that the employment in this field is supposed to increase to 42 million people by 2050, so in the next 30 years, it is very clear that this sector will only thrive if they get the best talents, and this involves both men and women. And so this is what we are here for. We aim to empower women in order to either enter this market or also increase their career, advance their careers. We run a series of mentoring programs with different partners. And we also do advocacy work. We have last year published a study which is called Women for Sustainable Energy, Strategies to Foster Women's Talents for Transformational Change. And this lists a lot of best practice examples, both from the public sector and the private sector, about how women can be empowered in order to really advance their careers in this field. I myself, I have been working in the energy field for many years, and I really have to say it's a very rewarding sector. It has grown since I entered, and if we can encourage women to take up leadership positions, I think this will not only be beneficial to them, but to the entire sustainable development movement.
Thank you, Christine, and thanks for bringing together that sense of community in terms of women in the energy transition, which is so important so that there is a commonality of objectives and a push towards achieving better numbers, achieving better business outcomes. Going on now to the moderated discussion, I'd like to pivot back to Katie. Katie, I think when you shared your opening comments, you talked about the whole trend towards ESG. And, there's an E component to it, an S component to it, and a G component to it. Focusing on the diversity-related component, which I guess gets reported more in the governance aspects of the company, how do you see can this equity and justice be coded, as you mentioned, into the data analytics? And what are some of the good mechanisms to do it? Are there some best practices that you could share with us?
Yeah, thank you very much for that. And I feel like Christine just shared incredible wealth of investment of expertise and effort around lifting women up in this sector. So thank you, Christine, for what you're doing. And what L'Oreal has done in terms of leadership is remarkable. I'll just share with you a little bit about what we're doing. It goes back to this piece that I said about being intentional and transparent and data-driven. So for us, it's very much about putting a target that we know will be a stretch, goal for us, but making it clear, making it public. We're at about 20% now in terms of women and minorities in leadership, and our goal that we are shooting for is to double that within 5 years. Behind that, though, is an incredibly robust set of initiatives and reporting undertakings that will enable us to be intentional and to measure our progress. So it is everything from insisting on any recruiting that we are doing that we have a diverse talent pool, and making that very clear. It includes really enabling people to come with their whole and best self to work, and having from the CEO on down now open and frank platforms for real discussion and standing everyone down, when there are issues that arise, looking them clearly in the eye. I shared on one of your wonderful sessions leading up to this great summit a little bit from my own experience that we're trying to incorporate in Johnson Controls. And that is to understand the difference between being a mentor and being a champion. And so we do have mentorship programs that we are really investing in. But what I hope and pray that I can be to women with building their career is when they are not in the room, but I have the privilege to be at the decision-making table. It's then that I'm bringing their name up. It's then that I'm advancing their capabilities. And the last thing I'll just share, getting back again to the metrics and back to accountability. So we do link our diversity objectives to executive compensation. And every month at the executive committee table at Johnson Controls, every month, every executive needs to report against their particular diversity goal and the progress that they're making, knowing that it is a factor linked to their overall compensation.
Great. I think, Katie, that's a real powerful best practice to incentivize diversity, right? And I thought the point you made about mentorship and sponsorship or champions is so important, because it's often when you're not in the room that your career either progresses or not. And I think that's very important. So those were great points for us to take back. I'm moving now to Laurel. Laurel, again, coming from the more technology lens and, from the STEM lens, you're a private company right now, and you've had a great run with investors investing several series of capital into you, and you're forming these partnerships. How are you keeping this lens of gender diversity intact when you're going and doing these partnerships? Is there some element of diversity which you're bringing in to these partnerships, etc.?
That's an interesting question. I'm not so sure that we're bringing it into the partnerships other than the people from our team that are engaged in developing those partnerships. So because we have, women who are part of our engineering team and working on, basic engineering for plants and interacting with partners, or we have women involved in the supply of ethanol from China to France that ultimately ended up in packaging for L'Oreal. It is that interaction, I think, that we bring to the partnerships. And internally, as you say, we are a private company, so we have no obligation for external reporting. But we actually have an internal team that voluntarily formed themselves, and they do a lot in terms of interacting within the company, surveying within the company, and they actually on their own bring topics to the management team. And so even within a 200-person company, there's a lot of communication and education going on. And it's been wonderful to see that spontaneous initiative that even in a company which is already quite diverse, as you say, in many ways, including, simply the representation of countries among our staff. But to have that ongoing awareness, I think has been really key for us, and it's been educational.
Yeah, I think that's really noteworthy, Laurel, that, you've, despite being a private company, you've adopted these higher standards of equity and diversity. And diversity, as you just said, not just in terms of gender equity, but also diversity in nationalities with your growing team in India, for instance. While I did ask you about how you're prioritizing your investments based on this, it may seem that you're coming across as that ideal partner to be partnered with, because because I think there's a growing pressure on supply chains and partnerships to also adopt the same standards so that there is uniformity, and sort of that sense of community only strengthens. I'd like to move to Alexandra. Alexandra, I can't see you, but I think you are on. Is that right?
Yes, and I put my camera on.
Okay, great. So Alexandra, coming back, what we have here is a great mix of a panel from the sort of the more producer end to the more consumer side of the equation, which is yourself. This being the fashion in the industry. From the consumer end, what do you feel? Are you bringing in certain gender equity and women's needs being prioritized when you're looking at your investments? Are you asking your partners to be? Are you looking at partners from that lens?
Yes, definitely. So for us, this is a very 360 approach. So as is our sustainable transformation. So yes, we do not look just internally in our company, but we look also at what we call the extended company and at all our partners. So first of all, for example, we do with other companies and competitors work on issues such as violence against women, for example, and how we can together support women who are concerned employees or other. We do, of course, but that's part of the ethical commitment. So any supplier who wants to work with L'Oreal is evaluated on this issue. This is part, of course, of every social audit every supplier has to go through. But now we take it, of course, everybody has to take things much further, because we cannot lead the ecological transition without an inclusive society. And to have an inclusive society, we need women everywhere and in every power position. So we also work with our suppliers, strategic suppliers now, go from a minimum wage to a living wage.
Okay.
So that people are not anymore paid a minimum wage, but a living wage. And of course, this is concerning a lot also the women in our value chain as producers of ingredients and so on. We have a lot of programs where we try. One is called solidarity sourcing, which is to open our to suppliers that normally do not work with accounts like L'Oreal. So this can be suppliers from underprivileged communities, people who employ long-term unemployed people, of course, a lot of women's businesses and so on. And so these are people that we search, our purchasing department looks for them proactively, including and accompanies them so that they are able to be included in our supplier base. We are also expect from our brands to get involved in this on a societal basis. And so there is, for example, L'Oréal Paris, who has started a campaign that you might have seen already, Stand Up Against Street Harassment, where we make available digital training for bystander intervention, so that people can intervene when they are witnessing harassment in the street. So this is really a whole movement. And of course, we have also the L'Oréal Foundation and our endowment fund with the L'Oréal Foundation. We are not just working for women in science, but now also for the women and climate issue, which is going to be the next frontier of impact, disproportionate impact on women. Of climate change. So yes, definitely, it's through our whole value chain with all our ecosystems and everywhere at every moment.
Yeah. Well, the change sometimes begins with the customer. And I think that's great to know that you've brought in that social audit, that sensitivity right back to your entire supply chain. Coming back to Christine. Christine, you probably have the broadest view of both the producers and the consumers and social, the NGO networks, etc. So how are you drawing a greater focus through some of your programs towards gender equity as you in increasing your membership, for instance?
When we created that GWNet, we clearly said that we do not want to reinvent the wheel. So we work a lot with women in energy networks from all around the globe. There are in some regional ones, there are national initiatives. We work, for example, in India with CEW, there are Women in Sustainability Initiative and many others. And we bring them together because we just see that these networks, many of them face the same challenges, have the same issues they struggle with, and by exchanging with each other, they quicker move ahead in really gathering women and making women in their constituencies stronger. And I think, as you know, we can by no means claim that as a global organization with a small secretariat in Austria, we can solve the issues all around the world, but we can bring them together, we can elevate them, we can bring light to the discussion, because I think a key issue, which was alluded to several times, is data. And as long as there is no gender desegregated data, be it in employment figures or also in the companies, if they are not there, it's very difficult to keep politicians and business leaders accountable for what they do. And I very much liked Katie's example that their management is held accountable, and this is directly having an impact on their remuneration, because I think that's you have to have always the stick and the carrot, and this is just a very nice example on how these go well together. So we work in partnership, and then we are, of course, on the one hand working with the top women in the sector from all around the world, but we're also trying to work on the next generation of women leaders in this field, and that's why we operate many mentoring programs on different sectors. So we have one together with the World Bank for women in energy storage. We've just launched this week something with SE for All and the Clean Cooking Alliance on women in clean cooking. We have a program with the global wind industry for women in wind. And we are now on soon, beginning of March, are going to initiate a series of geographical programs where we'll also launch a program for women in energy in India, along with many other countries. Because we are trying to create networks and putting these women in touch with a mentor that helps them to advance on their careers, but also put them in touch with their peers. And like this, they learn from each other, and they boost their confidence. And I think this is very important. And looking beyond just the top level, but also to the next generation is very rewarding, and ultimately will also, I think, bring about change. An example which really touched me profoundly when we started this off, we were not sure, we just gave it a try. We started small in 2018 with our first mentoring program, and we had a young woman from Ethiopia participating in this program, and at the end she found it so rewarding that she set up her own Women in Energy network in Ethiopia. You know, wonderful. This is really how it should be, because you then this just makes things bigger, and you can just be an initiator of things, and if they fall on fertile ground, it's very rewarding.
Right. I think that's the power of networks and micro networks you just emphasized. I think we have time really now for a lightning round. So what I'd just like to invite all our panelists to is just 30 seconds to a minute comments on, if we were to meet next year, same time, what is that one thing you would like companies to change, institutions to change? So let's start with Laurel.
No pressure. I'd actually like to come back to a point that was made early on, which is that really fundamentally to make the changes that we want more broadly, we have to look at this as a whole. It's an everyone's issue. When we talk about how are we going to accommodate women and family issues and allow them to accommodate all the sort of variability that comes with life, we need to consider that for all of our employees, our leaders, throughout our businesses. We as a small company have that flexibility. It is easier for us to do that, and we do that. And I would just say that's a perspective we need to maintain, because as long as we don't have a whole staff point of view and allow all people to understand, to have the flexibility to accommodate what happens in real life, right, it will be hard to have space.
Great. Katie.
First of all, I love that. To find a silver lining in this cloud of COVID, that we do hold up families, hold up individuals as we move forward, and honor our full commitments and responsibilities. My one word though, investors. I hope investors continue to drive and continue to insist, because there's a lot of things that boards and boardrooms pay attention to, what their top 3 or 10 investors are telling them, they certainly pay attention to. So I'm hoping that investors keep driving forward.
Great, Katie. Alexandra.
So I would say from a little bit a different point of view, but I hope when we come back in a year, the social crisis we are going into now is going to be well, I fear much worse than what we have just been through, and this crisis is going to affect disproportionately women everywhere. So I hope we'll come back and we will say that all companies have been aware of that and have supported women in a way in another to not disproportionately suffer from the consequences, and will have improved and strengthened their commitment to women, not just internally, but also externally among their stakeholders.
Okay. And the last 30 seconds, Christine, over to you.
Thank you, Gauri. Well, I very much like the African proverb proverb which says, if you want to go far, go alone, but if you want to go, if you want to go fast, go alone, but if you want to go far, go together. So I believe really in the power of networks, and I do hope that we manage more and more to celebrate these great examples of company leaders that you have just had here on this panel today, and many others that are out there, to make it known, because I think this is inspiring for many others, and I think good examples are there to be spread, and then will also convince others to move in that direction.
Thank you so much for a very rich discussion and much food for thought, much to ponder upon. And I hope we meet 1 year later or even before that to see that we've made progress on it. Over back to you, Monali. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Gauri, and thank you all the panel members, Katie, Lauren, Christine, and Alexandra. Great discussion. Now we are looking forward to having more investors, being women champions and excellent networks. A great discussion and some really good point as we move on to our next panel discussion, which is again very pertinent. It's advancing women leadership in businesses. In this panel, we will have experts discuss some of the key challenges that prevent women from taking up leadership role and potential solutions to advance women leadership. And again, in this, they would be talking about, networks, linkages, and support system. So for moderating our next panel discussion, we have with us Dr. Shalini Sareen, who is the co-founder and executive director, Electromobilitat, and a co-chair of SAWIE. Dr. Sareen's experience ranged from being a chief people officer to the head of corporate social responsibility to business leader for the base of pyramid solar lighting business for social impact. At SAWIE, she leads the mentorship group, she has worked all across India, Europe, and US. So we are extremely delighted to have you, Shalini, and I will now pass on the baton to you for taking the next panel discussion forward. Over to you, Shalini.
Thank you very much, Monali. And I was so engrossed in the previous conversation. It was wonderful. And I'm even more delighted today to invite my 4 very accomplished women leaders. And thank you once again to USISPF, USAID, SAWIE, and Terry to put this panel together. So, we've been, I think, talking about the fact that McKinsey report shared with us that there is enough awareness that if we have more women in the leadership team, then productivity, innovation, profitability is enhanced. And despite being aware of this, it will take us another 100 years to bridge the gap on SDG 5. And it's unfortunate that 2020, due to the pandemic, has taken us back in this effort. 1 in every 4 women is considering or has downshifted her career or left the workforce altogether in this pandemic. In 2019, however, we had seen that the representation of women had increased to 29% from 20% in boards. But unfortunately, India is 3rd from the bottom. And we really have just 4% CEOs at the National Stock Exchange. With that preamble, and to get more women in the leadership role, where it's extremely important to have the influence on decision making, I'm very pleased to invite and introduce Ms. Rana Gonhem, who is the Chief of Energy Systems and Infrastructure Division at UNIDO, where she oversees the organization's strategy and programs in promoting a low-carbon infrastructure powering industrialization and decarbonization of industry. She's worked in Africa and at MENA region, where she actively worked on mainstreaming approaches to utilize full potential of women in energy sector. May I please invite Rana for her opening remarks.
Hi, good afternoon. It's my pleasure to be here with you today, and thanks a lot for the invite. It's really heartwarming to see so many amazing women leaders gathered today, and some of which are role models for myself, Rachel, Christine, and others. So really happy and delighted to be here today. I guess to start off with numbers as well, the previous panel talked about numbers, and we know that in the renewable energy sector, it's about 1/3 of the workforce that is women. But I think we need to also look at it in a more disaggregated way, because if you look at it from the leadership side, there is less and less women as well. Just to look at the United Nations, where I work, actually, we notice and we see that at entry level, there's actually 2/3 women versus 1/3 men. But when we move up the ladder, we see the total opposite, with women constituting 1/3 versus men 2/3. So why is it like that, and what can we do to actually develop? And there's a lot that the UN and others are doing in terms of developing better and more inclusive policies, setting quotas, and providing more mentorship and training on leadership to women. And I'd be happy perhaps in the questions to really go through some of the work that we are doing, the different calls to action and areas of work. But I would like to actually start off with more the personal side and my story and what I can share also, because I trust that we have a lot of women that are listening to us here today. And I think one of the very first things is, this whole myth and misconception about assertive versus aggressive. That if we express our opinions, we are aggressive, whereas we are really just expressing our opinions. And I have to go back to my childhood, and I have to say that probably I was so lucky to be brought up in a household where at the dinner table, already at the age of 5, my father encouraged me to say my opinion, even if it was to tell him that he was wrong. And so I guess one of the lessons I bring forward here, and to the women that are working, speak up, say what you think, because you have something valuable to share. And if you don't say it, someone else will, and be sure that it's going to be a brilliant idea that everybody is going to love. I think the second lesson as well in my career, and it's really more this whole thing that we can multitask, and we are amazing. We do a lot of things. We want to be perfectionists, but you know what? We don't need to be perfectionists, actually, because at the end of the day, I think we need to also sometimes reach out, and we need to, find that ecosystem of support. And that support can mean the network of other women working in the sector, but it's also, that's where we need more the male role models that are willing also to step in and support at home, so that the woman can actually progress with her career. Because I cannot do the same thing that, my mom, who was staying at home, did, and still progress with my career. So that's the other, I guess, message I have here, is just like, you don't need to be perfect, ask for help, and all that. The third lesson for me as well is take all the opportunities that come your way. Don't shy away, and don't think that you have to be the 100% match for any job that you see. And this is something that I have to say really helped me a lot with my career, and brought me to be one of the youngest in, women, and not only women, in fact, men, at a leadership position within my organization. I really, anytime I thought that's a job I can do, I'm actually qualified for, I did not shy away from competing and going for that job, even when sometimes I was told, why are you applying for this? This guy actually has a family and he needs that job. Well, that is not really the benchmark, I guess, nowadays, and we really have to be more forthcoming in that. I guess a lot of lessons and things to share, but perhaps with that, I'd like to stop, and I look forward to the discussion. Thank you for inviting me again.
Wonderful, Rana. This was excellent to hear on your personal leadership traits, which are very important to get into the leadership team. I move now to invite Dr. Sujata Narayan, who's the Regional Vice President, WAPTEC India. Sujata has been conferred with several accolades and recognition for her work. To name a few, the prestigious honor of Rail Analysis Women of the Year in 2019 and top 50 CXOs in the Indian manufacturing industry, and a few others. She's also featured in Machinist magazine, run by Times Group, where she talks about what is driving WAPTEC India growth story with railways. I invite now Dr. Sujata to share her opening remarks.
Thank you, Shalini. Can you confirm that you can hear me?
Very well.
Okay, great. Good morning and evening to all the eminent panelists and attendees. I'd like to start by thanking Terry, SAWIE, USAID, and USISPF for bringing this critical topic of diversity and diversity leadership in the industrial workplace to this forum, as well as for giving me this opportunity to participate. So far, it's been fabulous, and I'm keenly looking forward to the dialogue and discussion in this panel discussion as well. As Shalini introduced me, I head the India region for WAPTEC Corporation. WAPTEC is one of the leading rail technology companies in the world. Most of you are aware that rail is actually one of the most sustainable sectors for the movement of both people and goods. And companies like WAPTEC are really focused on innovating in the space of sustainability, especially in energy. And the intent is to really leapfrog in terms of making rail transport even more of a sustainable segment. So as a woman leader of this industry, I'm really delighted to be here, and thank you for the opportunity again. Now, talking about women leadership in the industrial sector, the first thing I would like to say, and this is really from my vantage point, is that things have really improved quite a bit. If you take 20, 30 years ago, it's really certainly easier and more probable for a woman to make it to senior leadership position. And I have to say, thanks to large multinational American and European companies' policies on diversity, the culture and the policies are actually reaching slowly the large emerging economies like India and smaller countries as well. So that's kind of the good news. Having said that, I think the statistics is very clear, and it shows, especially in countries like India, that there are miles to go before we sleep. And in terms of bringing women to the board level, to the executive leadership level, to the senior leadership level, and to any leadership level at all in an organization. So if we have to address this, I believe it's really, really important for us to understand really the root cause analysis. It's not, I'm sure all of you agree, it's a complex problem. There are no simplistic explanations, and we have to look at this from the context of a geographical, an educational, a cultural, as well as a demographic context to this. And I believe that organizations that are really dedicated to improving diversity in the leadership, they need to, while they have to continue on their good practices of recruiting and talent management, but they cannot simply focus on that. They really, I believe, have to understand the world of women and the challenges that they are presented with every day for them to grow their career. They have to look at the women's world, the ecosystems that they handle on a day-to-day basis. I just want to give a very quick example from India. I read an article a few months ago saying that more women are dropping out of the workplace in India, especially in the middle class and the middle levels of leadership. And it was interesting, and I was very puzzled. And it actually went on to explain that it was because of the increased affluence of the middle class in India. So they didn't really as desperately need the second income. And it was just too difficult for women to come to work. So whether it is childcare, whether it's commute, flexibility in timings, etc., the atmosphere, it was not conducive. So they would rather drop out because it was not a financial imperative for the family. So I really think companies need to look, more deeply into the world of these women. They also have to, I think, venture into state and national policies that make it conducive for women to stay in the workplace and grow in their careers as well. So now that's from an organizational and an institutional perspective. Then, of course, the 50% of the onus is with the women themselves. And we just heard beautiful examples from Rana. And I have a very similar, I use this 3 C's mantra, right? It's competence, confidence, and courage. First and foremost, there are no shortcuts in life. And I think it's really important that women understand that they have to be really good at what they're doing if they want to really get to the top levels of leadership. That's just a given. It's a hygiene factor. Secondly, I think they have to have the confidence on their capabilities and their accomplishments and not be shy to market them at all, proactively, not just as a reaction to a job opportunity, but just to proactively market the fantastic work that we do. And thirdly, in order to grow, really, we must have the courage to take risks and venture into new areas. An example from my own career, for the longest time, I worked in R&D. And then I was given the opportunity of running a business. And it was really an intimidating opportunity. And I just chose to take it, knowing that if you don't take these kinds of moves in your career, you don't grow. And that it was the single biggest step that I took to get to where I am today. So I can really go on forever about thoughts of women in leadership, especially in the industrial segment. But I'd like to stop now, and I look forward to taking a number of interesting questions during the panel discussion. So thank you, and over to you, Shalini.
Thank you very much, Sujata. And thanks for taking us beyond the self into the environment and about taking risk. With this, I move to Rachel, whom I've admired very much and interacted in my days with Philips. So welcome, Rachel. Rachel is the Dean Fletcher School at Tufts University. Rachel is a graduate of Fletcher School and now teaching at the alma mater. The program attracts students from all corners of the globe in all stages of their career. Prior to joining Fletcher, Rachel served as special representative of the UN Secretary General and CEO of SE for All, and that's where I met her, and that's where we interacted. She previously was with World Bank Group and a special envoy of climate change, leading in the runner-up of Paris Agreement, and at IFC responsible for ESG, risk and business advisory. May I invite you, Rachel, to share your opening comments?
Yes, well, thank you very much. It's a real pleasure to be here and to be amongst so many friends and to address the audience. So much has already been said, and I thought the comments in the first panel from Katie, from Christine, who I admire for many years, and then obviously the panel now, I would double down on Rana's comments and Sujata's. But I just want to make three comments sort of looking about, well, okay, what are we going to do then, right? The numbers are clear. The longitudinal analysis is quite clear that more diverse teams, and that includes gender diversity, make better risk-based decisions. And here we are at a particular moment in our history where we're right in the middle of some extraordinary crises, a crisis of climate, a crisis of biodiversity and nature, a crisis of inequality, a crisis of pollution and waste. And we're not in a position to not be able to use every piece of talent that we have as a species. And so this is like high risk, right? We have no time to sort these crises out. So we need everybody at every stage of their careers, and we need both sexes at the table to sort this out. So I think that now that we know that that more diversity gets you better risk-based decision making, we know that must apply to the C-suites and the boards of companies. It should apply to cabinets and governments as well at the local and national level. Then we need to see regulation nudging this all the way through. And I think the regulation may be different in different cultures, but if financial regulators are asking banks and firms to explain how they're going to manage the risk of climate, for example, then they should be asking them, well, how are you going to manage your business if you don't have a diverse management team and a diverse board and diverse approaches to these extraordinary challenges? So I think there's a little bit more leaning in that can be done by regulators on the back of all of the evidence that others have talked about. Investors are beginning to vote with their feet, as we've seen from the comments from Katie and others in the first panel. And so now I think, we have to keep encouraging investors to, double down on the risk question. So, are you a member of TCFD? Can you explain how you're going to manage your business through an era of decarbonisation? And can you explain how you're going to do that without a diverse team, or how are you going to get a diverse team in order to be able to manage it? And from a risk position, the fact that young people now want to work for firms whose values are aligned in this way And if they have a choice, they're going to choose the firm whose values and whose support for women, certainly for young women. This is going to be increasingly important because the search for talent is going to be constraining on firms, and we already see that. Now, I work at a university and I run a graduate school for international affairs, but we work very closely with our engineering school. And the intake is superb, right? Absolutely brilliant young women coming through engineering schools, coming through STEM education now more and more. It's not globally happening, but it's beginning to happen in a number of countries. But then these women take up positions in firms, and then they have a donut in their career. And that's where I think we have to have a public-private partnership, because at that point, it's child rearing, it's bearing children and taking care of children. And then immediately that sort of maybe you go back to the workplace, and then you're looking after your seniors, right? And the burden of that is still on women. So we need urgent public policy to catch up with the fact that we need women in the workplace, and women have a contribution to make. And even in the most advanced economies, the regulations and the policies around how women can re-enter the workforce, how they can have on-ramps and off-ramps through their careers, is something which is still too clunky. There are some notable exceptions, New Zealand, parts of Europe, but really worldwide that we need to do much more there. And then thirdly, not all women are equal. And I certainly see at a graduate school that we have to work much harder in the mentoring of women who come from perhaps minority backgrounds. So in England, we talk about Black, Asian, minority, ethnic young women. And in the United States, we talk about Black, Indigenous, and people of color. These women often find that they don't have access to the same networks. They don't feel as confident in the off-ramp from their education into their careers and then building their careers as they go. So there's much more that we can do to make sure that mentoring and sponsorship efforts are truly diverse themselves. So maybe I'll stop there with one final comment, which is that we've talked a lot about breaking through the glass ceiling. I think that as a woman who's getting on a little bit now, you can see the grey. What I found so important in my career in the last sort of decade or so and now is the relationships and the mentoring networks and friendships with other women in similar roles, sometimes different roles, but at similar stages of their career. And the ability to just sort of talk through how to manage your way through some of the problems, because let me tell you, it doesn't go away. Just last week alone, I was told by a senior political elected leader that they couldn't find qualified women for roles that they were appointing. I mean, and this is somebody who knows better, and certainly knows better than to say it to me, but still felt that was a reasonable excuse for inaction. So the issues don't go away. And then when you get to our level, you often face what I would call the glass cliff. And this is that if the job is really, really difficult, then you give it to a woman to do. Now, 9 times out of 10, women outperform and they take on the most difficult jobs and they succeed. But this still is also a dynamic as well. And at that moment, we really have to support each other, because you've been given really intractable problems. We have to support each other to be able to succeed at them. I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you, Rachel. Thank you very much. And that takes me to introduce my last speaker, and I'm delighted to introduce Susan Ferguson, representative of UN Women India. Susan has lived and worked in South Africa, Solomon Islands, Papua New Guinea, and where she's worked, she's lived for 12 years. She has an experience of working at grassroots levels, which is extremely important and enriching, and has developed agencies establishing and managing social services, working with local, state, federal government in Australia on social policy and social programs. Her diverse career spanning over various themes of gender equality and social justice is incredible. So I'm really happy to invite you, Susan, for your introductory remarks.
Thank you so much, Shalini, and thank you all the panelists. I found it absolutely riveting, even though it's about 1 a.m. here. I'm not tempted to go to sleep. So thank you very much, and I've already learned so much from all of you as well. So my remarks really focus more on the why, because I think everyone has already made the case that it is so important to have women in leadership. in business and in other parts of life. It's also a human right that women have a right to sit at these sorts of tables of decision making. And also it makes good economic sense. And I think that that business case has been made very clearly already with the previous panel as well. So, but, you know, really my question is, so why haven't things changed? And, you know, Rachel was just talking about this as well. You know, this is not an issue that is going away. There has been improvements. There's no doubt about it. But there's still so many barriers to women playing the same or, you know, having equal roles as men in leadership. So, and I really believe that having more women in leadership in all walks of life could really be a game changer. I mean, it shouldn't be innovative, but it still is an innovation. And I think, especially with the pandemic, we're going to really need to use all of our talent to really, you know, build back and build back better. So I think one of the reasons that this is such a sticky issue is that a lot of the barriers are invisible. They don't necessarily happen or they're not necessarily primarily taking place in the workplace. So, for instance, you know, the issue of domestic violence is a massive impediment to women taking up any kind of roles outside the house. One aspect of violence actually is social isolation. And we know that, you know, globally, a third of women globally experience domestic violence. And I read a statistic recently from our Secretary General saying that in the next 3 months, another 15 million women will experience this kind of violence. So that has a huge impact on women being able to progress their careers. It also has a huge impact of women getting around. Just catching the bus to work, for example, is an impediment at times if women feel unsafe. But the other ones that are often quite invisible to us are these social norms. And I think our panel has also already touched on the issue of, you know, women's caring responsibilities and domestic responsibilities. You know, women work far more hours in general than men, and often the idea of having to work more hours to progress their career is impossible. It's just a bridge too far. And again, with the pandemic, these social responsibilities at home have really risen as children have had to be homeschooled, for example, and a lot of that extra burden falls on women's shoulders. So, you know, the other issue about these invisible norms that we carry around inside us from whichever part of the globe or walk of life we're from, they lead to what we call unconscious bias. And that's an acceptance by men and also many women that, you know, for example, men make better leaders than women. You know, that's the role of men in the public sphere, not of women. Women are mothers and carers. So, I mean, I'm being very kind of black and white here to illustrate what I'm saying. You know, but also often at work, these unconscious bias comes into things like, you know, women are meant to be likable. And I think that Rana spoke about this a bit also, you know, that to be forceful in your opinion can be seen as aggressive, and that's not something that women should be. So, and there's stereotypes around women as, you know, women are mothers, and mothers should be at home looking after their children, or women, you know, should be segregated into parts of the labour force that relate to our caring roles, like, you know, teachers or nurses. So there's also segregation in the markets, and it's very difficult for women to sort of leap over some of these barriers without additional help. There are other, you know, structural barriers like legal barriers as well. So I think that, you know, often people say, well, why can't women just, you know, there's plenty of women in the world who have overcome these barriers and taken up positions of leadership. And here, really, I think we have to ask, well, and it gets back to, I think, Sujata's point you raised about confidence. And, if you're being undermined at home, for example, it's hard to feel confident in having a strong opinion at work. And as well, I really think that a lot of these barriers they're not made by women. They're often made by, those who are the dominant part of, who hold the power balance at work, who are often men. So it really is beholden on everyone. This is a shared problem. This is not just a problem for women. This is a problem for everyone. And that everyone has a role to play in actually opening up the door so that women can walk through and take that leadership that they also have a right to. So with that, I'll hand back over. Thank you very much, Shalini.
Thank you very much. That was very, very enlightening. So Rana, if I can come back to you with a specific question. You talked about the self and what the self needs to develop, and you shared your examples on assertiveness, on the notion of being a perfectionist versus asking for help and reaching out, and also about grabbing opportunities and taking risks. So can I ask you to share some of the best practices which go beyond the self to the environment, to the community, to the organization, and the culture?
Of course. Thanks a lot for that question. So UNIDO as an organization does quite a lot on empowering women, the economic empowerment of women. So I have to say, when I hear of issues like violence and so on, it's really it's not necessarily an area where we work, and it kind of sort of holds me back, but what we are doing actually is, so if we talk about biases, we have programs that support investments or investors, projects to find investors in the energy sector. And we notice as well that the investors do have a certain way of questions. I mean, the way that they do pose questions to women puts women at a disadvantage. And so there is a certain bias that is geared towards women in the way that investors are approaching the topic. And so there, what we are doing is actually helping women by training them more on, how to address these, type of questions and how to overcome them, not get so much kind of focused on resolving the issues, but rather really getting out there. So training and helping women in overcoming some of these biases that come up in interviews, be it for investments or in other issues. This is a key area of our work. Another is actually that, we talked about like women maybe not showing up as well sometimes in some of the projects that we are working. They're just simply not there. Well, they are, but they actually need a more specific call to them for them to come to the table. So, for example, we support quite a lot women entrepreneurship as well in the energy sector. And there I have a really nice example that I always like to quote from our work in Pakistan, where when we started off, we had barely 10% of participation of women in a contest that we had on clean tech. But year over year, as we were more deliberate in coming up with specific calls for women-led enterprises, we managed within 3 years to actually get that to equal participation. And that's what we are all here advocating for. In addition to this, over the past year and with the pandemic, as we work in really very technical areas, and it was quite an important step for us to really work on highlighting some of the good examples of role models that are working in industry. Yes, so when you go to the industries like cement and iron and steel and others, it's just simply not a very conducive environment. And so working on bringing examples of women that have actually supported and been able to penetrate the barriers and support these industries has been also quite a big highlight of our work. As an organization as well, internally, I think that is also something because we talked about policies. And so I think that is quite important to allow women to progress. So, working on policies that promote the work-life balance, working from home, even having quotas or, certain commitments of organizations that do kind of have a target for women participation within leadership and boards. I mean, these are all examples, but I see you nodding and kind of rushing me, so I guess it's about time to pass on, but I can talk about this on and on and on.
Thank you very much. Thank you. And with that, I move to Sujata, and I want to, just read out the question that has come from our viewers, and that is, since you're working in India and you're working in the transport segment, what can we do to encourage more women from the base of the pyramid or the economically underserved women to become change makers and leaders?
I think it's a really difficult question. And the reason is that it's a little bit like the Maslow's hierarchy, right? People who are underprivileged on the base of the pyramid have so many problems to solve. They've got, just basic poverty, health, hygiene. So, but I think my take is that it's a longer thing, but it starts with education, because you can't get into the workplace without the right level of education. So I think this is where governments as well as the private sector could really play a big role in educating girls from underprivileged households to get the kind of education which can get them jobs, right? So you flood the base of the companies with a number of women, and then we really have to, like I said, when I was talking about my opening comments, you've got to support their ecosystem. It's the commute, it's the childcare, and these are things that are even more difficult for people from the lower part of the pyramid, because they can't throw money at the problem. Like many of us, you just get a cook, you just get a babysitter, and you can go ahead and go build that career, which is very hard for people down there. So it's possible in India. You've got a lot of these quota systems where you've got economically unprivileged people who can get certain benefits. So maybe we really understand what are those things that are holding these women back from being able to work and being able to grow, and we make sure that they get those that support. And I think, frankly, if you ask me, while COVID, the statistics I heard about so many people dropping out, it's also been a blessing, because most men leaders who could never conceive of people working from home it's been proven over a year that anything and everything can be done from home. And that's, I think, hugely helpful for women, although there is still a lot of burden on them, but it kind of addresses the little bit the childcare, the commute, those kinds of things. So I know I kind of broadened my answer, but I do believe that, they need a lot of support. And I think it has to come from, companies could support, but it also has to come from policies and regulations.
Thank you very much, Sujata. And I'm going to move very quickly to Rachel. Rachel, since you spoke about public policy, and I want to pose this question, is it a question of inclusion, or is it a question of equal opportunity and human rights? And how, what are the kind of social policies and targeted incentives that are essential to redistribute the burdens of unpaid work?
Well, it is fundamentally an issue of rights and equality and equity. It's nearly 26 years since the Beijing Platform of Action. The Beijing Platform of Action was very, very clear what every government needed to do. And so if you flip it and think about a woman, an energy entrepreneur, a women's own company in large parts of the world, is your access to a bank loan the same as a male entrepreneur? We know that women behave differently around money. They are tackier with their banker. Once they've got a trusted relationship, they often use family, brothers, uncles, fathers' money before they'll go and borrow from others. They tend to have a different attitude to equity over working capital. So there are all kinds of gender differentials. But, does that woman have an access to a bank account? Can she Can she use her movable assets as collateral? Can she access collateral any other way? Can she even hold title to land? Does she still need her husband to sign off on key documents? These battles are still to be won in many parts of the world. So yes, it's about equality. Yes, it's about rights, and UN Women and others lead, and the women's movement lead on that. But then it's also about economic performance. It's about building inclusive, sustainable economies. It's about making sure that women who, at the end, women are making purchasing decisions in the household. Women are making sure that they understand that the priority for any disposable income at the family level has got to go to medicine and food. It's women putting food on the table. It's women cooking. Those decisions, which are fundamental to how economies move forward and grow, those are being made by women. If that voice is not heard, if that perspective is not understood, you can have bad policy decisions made very quickly in advanced economies as well as in a low-income economy. So it's both.
Great. Thank you very much, Rachel. And that's a great segue for my last question to Susan, that women inherently have some qualities and strengths. And we've been also talking about, how women need to market themselves and differentiate through those trends. What is your belief? Why are they not surfacing, and where can they be leveraged? You're on mute, Susan.
That's such an interesting question. So because I'm torn about whether we have different qualities or not. So I think, I think that it's really important for workplaces to value a whole range of different kinds of people. So, and the different things that we can bring, so if you look at the sort of stereotypical things that women are more, sort of known for, which is that caring and compassionate side, I think, that's hugely important in the workplace. I think there was an article that my manager told me about recently in the Harvard, one of the, big publications, which said that actually you can do all of these HR sort of courses, but really what makes a difference at work is kindness. And so I think that it's so important for workplaces to value that kindness and compassion. And here I think, if there was more of that, maybe we'd have more family-friendly policies, because people would be more open to thinking about what does this worker need to be able to do their job. So I think that's really important. But likewise, I think too is the sort of, the courage, I think, that Sujata spoke about as well, and feeling that you are a part of a team that can sort of cut through, make decisions and achieve results. And I think that, it's so important for women to access that side of themselves, as well as men accessing some of the more, the sort of softer sides. So I think the workplace, like any kind of institution in our lives, has to embody the full person, not just, one side or the other.
And especially when we create these ecosystems which need collaboration, I think that's
Absolutely.
where inherent strength comes in. So I have just one last question, and if you can all answer in not more than one suggestion or one advice for USISPF, USAID, SAWIE, and Terry. What is that one thing that these organizations must do to move the needle? So if I can start with Rana.
Yeah, it's difficult for me to choose usually. I have a bunch of things, but I visited Terry a couple of years ago, and I admire the work that you guys do at a ground root level. And I realized sometimes some of this discussion is like there's quite a lot of different barriers there and I guess one of the recommendations would be to bring this closer to, the women that are underprivileged, that are working in villages. You have brilliant examples of solar entrepreneurs that are young girls, advocate that more and show that also across different geographies, basically, or regions within India.
Thank you very much. And with that, if I can move to Sujata.
Sure. One thing that I think that we don't do enough of is really market the value of diversity. We've been talking about this McKinsey report and lots of reports that have been published in the past. And I think there isn't a nicely packaged campaign for both men and women to understand and articulate in all these different organizations, whether they're companies or institutions. And so I think it ultimately comes down to an individual and them really believing that this is important, and then change can start, or it's easier to start. So I think we could do more in kind of dispersing that information.
Thank you, Sujata. And with that, if I move to Rachel, your advice?
Well, I think that was a very good idea. And so I would sort of put two hands on that. But then I think that, look, Terry is so well respected at home and abroad, and has its own story to tell of pain and coming through that. And so there's an authenticity to your journey and your message. And I think that Terry actually has a voice which could be unassailable on this. Because every company, every organization, every institution has to do better. And you know that, and you've done it. And so I think that that's very powerful.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Rachel. And with that, I move to Susan.
Thank you, Shalini. Well, I have to sort of circle back a little bit to Katie, actually, and her idea of investment. And, really investing in women's leadership and encouraging others, so I guess advocating as well, and encouraging others to really put a sort of the money where we know it's going to make a really big difference for women themselves and for, the economies of the world. So, and lastly, I think it is really important to advocate for targets. We know that targets do make a difference in improving women's leadership. So I think that's also really crucial. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I would really now like to end and thank all the previous speakers and the panel right now. It's been an honor and privilege to speak to all of you. I hand over back to Monali.
Thank you so much, Shalini, and all the speakers, Rana, Sujata, Rachel, and Susan. We have done excellent in terms of time management. Thank you for that, and great discussion. We heard some really good pointers for even USAID to consider. Targets, definitely, that's one thing which we could keep in mind, and investments and advocacy, that's again something which USAID has been advocating, and that's something which SAWIE, even as we move forward with SAWIE, we will take care of it. So now we are almost at the last leg of our program, and before we wrap it up, I wanted to pass on to Dr. G. Mini, who is the fellow at TERI, and quickly introduce her. Dr. G. Mini has over 18 years of experience of working as a social and gender expert in various projects related to energy, climate change, and sustainable development. In her capacity at TERI, she has worked extensively in several states of the country and has been involved in numerous stakeholder assessments, community engagement, and gender mainstreaming activities. But before I hand it over to you, Mini, I just wanted to quickly thank and do my bit of thanking on the organizing team at TERI, SAWIE, USISPF, and Deloitte, which is USAID's implementing partner, for greening the Great GTG Rise initiative, for the excellent work in terms of all the organizing, doing such a great job in terms of bringing such great speakers, and for the this plenary thematic discussion today. So with that, I'm now going to hand it over to you, Dr. Mini, for your closing remarks. Dr. Mini. Dr. Mini, are you there?
Yeah. Thank you, Monali. And good morning and good evening, all. And as all good things come to an end in life, so is our event. And today's discussion has clearly highlighted the challenges of entrenched gender stereotypes in business. And it has also clearly underlined the positive correlation between gender diversity and business success, particularly when women are actively represented at decision making and leadership roles. I mean, there are no two ways about it. And on that positive note, on behalf of Terry and audience, I would like to thank all the speakers of the day for gracing your important work and sharing your findings and opinions with us. We are really enlightened by the presence and rich deliberations. I must also mention our deep sense of appreciation for moderators for facilitating the panel presentations, particularly keeping the panelists focused, pulling great information from the panelists, and keeping the audience engaged. And most importantly, I would like to thank the South Asian Women in Energy, SAWIE, USAID, and US India Strategic Partnership Forum, that is USISPF, for their persistent support and coordination. And events like this do not happen overnight. So, as when the wheel started rolling weeks ago, we were fortunate enough to be backed by very dedicated and motivated support from Ripu, Garima, Monali, and Siddharth. And specifically, I would like to thank people who have been the backbone of today's event, especially our technical arrangement and the social media team. I also take this opportunity to thank everyone who has directly and indirectly contributed to this event. And once again, thank you all for being with us. It's been a great pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you all, ladies and gentlemen, for joining us today. It's been a great pleasure. So see you in the plenary tomorrow.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you, Monali.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.